Okay, so it's 4:15 on my clock, so we can officially open this session. Thank you everybody for coming to the session D235, co-design and co-creation. So on this second day and the third slot, I'm Tomislav Martinec from University of Zagreb. I will be chairing this session. As you see, we only may have 4 papers, but we have 4 excellent papers in this session, one of which has also been awarded with the Reviewer's Favorite Award. And I would say that despite the different scopes in the papers, so from designing AI solutions, from construction projects, herding, husbandry, finance sector, so there's a little bit of everything. But all papers are in some way or another related to including users and other stakeholders, as well as people with different backgrounds into the design process. So this is all with a goal to make the most out of the design process and design something that is more effective for the user. And also from the research point, in addition to the co-design and co-creation, you will also see a lot of research through design and action research, where the authors of presented papers they were involved in many different ways in the design process. So either as observers, as designers, as facilitators. So it's also interesting from that point. And also on the other hand, you will see some interesting examples from real life design projects, which are the result of the aforementioned co-design and co-creation efforts. So I would say that one thing that definitely connects the 4 papers is that, and this can be also a good foundation for the discussion later, is that we can experience different aspects of the real design, real co-design and co-creation processes, but also from the researcher's perspective. And here with me, here on the stage in the call, are the presenting authors of the papers assigned to this session. So we have Álvaro Aranda-Muñoz, who prepared the paper Co-Design with AI Insight. We have Andreas, Claus, Hansen, and maybe we will have Josef Oehmen also joining us later with the paper Tailoring a Project Risk Management Tool through Co-Design, Managing Risk in the Fuzzy Front End of Construction Projects. We have also Eriksson, who will present User-Centered Co-Design in the Pandemic, a Reindeer case. And we have Giovanni Inella, who will present Speculating on Nature, Technology and Finance, Geomers as a case study for research through design. We will first play all the pre-recorded videos, the pre-recorded presentations, and we'll also give a short introduction before each video. This will take around 30 minutes, I think, and then afterwards we have plenty of time for discussion, around 45 minutes. So I kindly ask all session participants to start the discussion by writing their questions into the comment section, into the chat section. So this is on your right side. And please clearly indicate to which presentation your question refers to. So either with a number or with the presenter's name, and we will make sure to include it in the presentation. So I think we can start with the first presentation. The first presentation is by Álvaro Aranda-Muñoz, as I said, co-designing with AI Insight. Álvaro is an industrial PhD student and interaction designer working in collaboration with the industrial sector in a variety of domains, contexts, and uses of technology. This includes working from a design perspective in projects directly related with Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and co-design. So we can move on to his presentation.
Hello and welcome to this presentation for the Design 2022 conference. The title of the paper is Co-Designing with Artificial Intelligence Insight, and it has been written by Álvaro Aranda-Muñoz, Ulrika, Florin, Yuji Yamamoto, Yvonne Eriksson, and Kristian Sandström. Artificial intelligence offers a wide variety of capabilities that can potentially address people's needs and desires in their specific contexts. In this pilot study, we identify a scarcity of literature and studies addressing mediation tools for collaborative design purposes with artificial intelligence and present a collaborative method using a deck of AI cards tested with 58 production, AI, and information science students and experts from an accessibility media agency. The aim is to introduce and analyze the collaborative method and the usage of AI cards and highlight found arguments for the involvement of people in the early stages of design opportunities with artificial intelligence. This led us to the following research question: how can people be supported in the artificial intelligence idea generation process? The pilot study was composed of 4 digital workshops where the units of analysis were both the method and the artificial intelligence cards. We selected participants to observe the use of the same method and AI cards in a broad range of domains. As it can be appreciated on the table, we conducted a workshop with 20 students from the Big Data and Cloud Services for Industrial Applications course as part of a master's program, a workshop with 30 students from the Applied Artificial Intelligence bachelor's program, a workshop with 3 students from the master's program in Archival Studies, Library and Information Studies, and a workshop with 5 experts from the Swedish Agency for Accessible Media. As empirical material, the 2 facilitators, also the researchers, took field notes to record the descriptions participants gave about their brainstorming sessions, prioritization, problem descriptions, and conceptual solutions. Also, at the end of each workshop, the facilitators conducted a reflective activity to gather feedback from participants about the design activities and the artificial intelligence cards. In this reflective activity, participants wrote feedback regarding the use of the cards and the method and shared verbally some of their reflections. We also collected ideas written and diagrams created by participants. The content of the artificial intelligence cards is based on literature concerning human-centered artificial intelligence, participatory AI, and AI applications. The result of this process was a deck of 11 AI capabilities. You can see in the image 4 examples of them. We also included 6 cards that address some AI concerns, like for example security, inclusivity, privacy, sustainability, transparency, and accountability, and 4 cards that act as potential wicked problems, like harmful data, no privacy, inequality, and environmental and social concerns. One of the design aims of the AI cards was to abstract the engineering aspects of artificial intelligence, like supervised and reinforced learning, and remove the stages of data collection and data processing. Each workshop lasted between 2 and 2.5 hours, starting with the same presentation on artificial intelligence. To facilitate the activities with AI, the researchers designed a template in the web software Mural. In the image, you can see the flow of the different 5 activities. The 5 activities consisted of a warm-up, brainstorming with the artificial intelligence cards, prioritizing ideas on a canvas, describing the opportunity selected, and exploring the opportunity further to provide a final conceptual solution. Then the facilitators conducted a reflective activity with the participants. The industrial master students proposed more than 50 ideas, like the use of a vision camera to identify quality press deviations, or tuning machines by recognizing the sound of the machine. The bachelor's students approached brainstorming quite broadly and suggested more than 80 ideas with topics such as meal planning and the interpretation of laws and rules. The experts from the Agency for Accessible Media brainstormed more than 20 ideas and documented the specific challenges they faced in their everyday work activities. For example, the experts explored how artificial intelligence could help through intuitive searches, comparing specific search patterns of different user groups with different reading difficulties. The librarian students presented 12 ideas as an example, personalized recommendations of new books to read. This last idea is presented as a narrative to illustrate the method and use of the cards in a more in-depth manner. These participants focused on the challenges librarians face when recommending a book, as for example, librarians are not experts of specific genres. They do not have access to the history of books that someone has read, and it is hard to know what books are currently on the library shelves without checking the library system or shelves. In their conceptual solution, the participants explore how artificial intelligence could contribute to better personalized recommendations for citizens. The participants discussed that it would be nice for librarians to receive a list of suggestions based on the citizens' preferences. In this concept, the citizen can use the library machines to answer a few questions in exchange for a list of books and other potential media. The library machine would print out a paper with a list of recommendations that the librarian and the citizen could use to discuss potential book choices. During the discussion, the participants recognized some potential shortcomings of the AI system, including the need to comply with the current GDPR and what data to collect, and to inform the users about it, as well as the shortcomings that some people might have challenges using the system, especially the elderly and kids. As a discussion and conclusion, we see that the method combined with the AI cards supported participants in the process of ideating and reaching conceptual solutions based on AI capabilities. The cards presented AI capabilities and abstracted engineering aspects of artificial intelligence, helped to frame the discussions on a high level, and served as a repository of AI capabilities and as mediators in discussions that cover broader topics of artificial intelligence without addressing technological implementations, such as ethical aspects, potential shortcomings, and broader contextual aspects. Also, we highlight the need for a more systematic process in order to identify artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities, especially for people who lack computational skills and studies of how such capabilities can be conveyed to people. From an industrial perspective, this involvement of people in co-design activities with AI can help preserve meaningful work aspects and potentially help integrate AI solutions more inclusively in work environments. As future work, we view it as a compelling option that AI collaborative practices incorporate prototypes which allow participants to experience different AI capabilities. This study was a pilot study, and now we are in the stage of testing the methodology and the tool in an industrial setting with industrial participants to ideate and implement conceptual AI solutions in factories. Thanks for listening, and also we would like to thank our participants.
Okay, so we're moving on to the second presentation. And the second presentation is by Andreas, Claus, Hansen, and Josef Oehmen. It is about tailoring a project risk management tool through co-design, managing risk in the fuzzy front end of construction project design. And this paper has been awarded with a reviewer's favorite award, meaning that the average score of the paper received from the reviewers ranks it within the top 10% of all submission. So one big congratulations to the authors for the award. And just a short CV. So Andreas is an industrial PhD student researching on improving cost risk management of large construction projects at the Danish Building and Property Agency and DTU Management. Andreas holds a master's degree in civil engineering and graduate diploma in business administration, and has work experience as among others, head of construction client consulting at an engineering consultancy prior to engaging in research. So I think we can continue with the presentation.
All right. Hello and welcome, everybody. This is Josef and Andreas. And I get to talk now because Andreas did all the work, so he'll be talking during the presentation. We're super excited to welcome you to our session. What's the main takeaway, Andreas?
The main takeaway is that you could actually do tailoring of a project risk management tool and get a better result than doing the generic version.
Yeah. So design thinking for the win. Yeah. All right. And now we'll jump into the presentation.
All right, so we'll get to presenting the actual paper and its content, and we start off with defining the problem. The problem is that in a lot of large-scale infrastructure and construction projects, it is common to have cost overruns. That is, that the project ends up costing more than the initial budget. Here we have taken a few examples. Those are well known, including the airport in Berlin, the Sydney Opera House, and of course the Channel Tunnel between UK and France. So why do we have these problems? One thing could be that some of the characteristics of large-scale construction projects are that they, of course, are in consecutive phases, and a lot of the management methods and processes we use to control projects like this focus on the design and the construction stage, that is the execution of the projects. But a little less attention is given to other stages of the processes. Furthermore, both traditional project management and also the risk management of these projects tend to be guided by best practice literature. That is guidelines, standards, and recommendations for how to do projects successfully. These best practice tools are often one size fits all, that is generic methods, and they end up easily becoming tick-the-box activities. The status quo then of large-scale infrastructure and construction projects are, with the words of Ben Flubia, one of the famous mega project scholars, that projects go over budget, over time, under benefits, over and over again. So what can we do? Our approach is based on some of the recognized potentials that are already identified in literature, that being that there might be an option of tailoring the project risk management processes instead of using the generic methods from best practice, and the other one being that it might be possible to start some of the risk management processes at an earlier stage, that is the fuzzy front end of the construction projects. In the literature, however, there is a gap on how to tailor, and we're looking into that. So we identified some options of using both project management literature and design research to develop a tailoring method. In this research, we look at a case organization that is a public-client construction organization working with large-scale construction projects. When we evaluate their risk management processes, specifically regarding a project and complexity assessment for new projects, we find that the processes they use strictly adhere to both the regulations required for them to perform to, but also to the best practice guidelines. But going deeper into the data collection we have done, doing interviews, also doing observational studies, and of course looking at all the documentation that are there, and looking at all of this data from the actuality perspective of project management, that is what is actually going on in the projects and not just what were written that was supposed to be going on, then we find another picture. This includes a lack of coherent activities. It also includes that the specific risk management activity we are looking at are not really supporting the decision making that was supposed to be supported. And furthermore, we also find an inherent perceived lack of value from major stakeholders in the processes. Looking at this data, we use the framework from design research called the double diamond to, together with stakeholders, to evaluate and explore the problem space. Furthermore, the double diamond also offers us the opportunity of co-designing the solutions together with the participants. In our case, the participants are all major stakeholder groups as presented in the table. Through an iterative process of going back and forth, both in the problem space and the solution space with all our participants, we managed to design a new and revised solution for the project assessment and complexity evaluation. This new and revised solution is being carried out in the earlier stages of the project lifecycle, that is in the fuzzy front end. And we also, in the revised solution, have changed the content to better reflect the value perception of the major stakeholders. And furthermore, we also changed who are filling out or doing this assessment to enable a better cross-organizational collaboration. During this work, we have found out that the double diamond fosters a good basis for mutual understanding with the designer and with the participants about what we are doing in each step of the design process. We have also found that the actuality perspective helps us uncover hidden problems in the organization that might not be found with the best practice perspective. And we have also found that this method of co-design actually supports the stakeholders' value perception of the risk management method, and that it's able to combine some of the sub-problems that different stakeholders see. And in this process, we were also able to, in our case, to actually facilitate a better formal risk management in the fuzzy front end of the construction projects.
All right, and I'm back. Thank you, Andreas.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you for your kind attention. And
yeah, we hope to have inspired you to look into our paper, and we're looking forward to all the great discussions and watching the other presentations.
See you in a bit.
Bye. Bye.
Okay, thank you. And also a reminder that you can write down the questions in the chat section. So we move on to the third presentation, which is from Åsa Eriksson, and she will present on user-centered co-design in the pandemic, a reindeer case. Åsa is a professor in information systems towards product service systems. Her research interests are user orientation, innovation, co-creation, and teamwork.
Hi, my name is Åsa Eriksson. My co-authors are Johan Lugnet, Hatharat, Lisa, and Johan Wenngren. We have written the contribution User-Centered Co-Design in the Pandemic, a Reindeer Case. The contribution is about reindeer herding and Sami culture. And this is represented in the Sami flag. So red is fire, warmth and love. Green is nature, and nature is essential for survival. Sun, yellow, long and prosperous life, and blue, water, water brings life. The ring connects the element and is a symbol for a holistic view. Included in the Sami tradition is reindeer herding, and a Sami village consists of several reindeer owners, and they have together a large herd of thousands or more reindeers. But when talking about their animals, they say the reindeer, since every individual in the herd matters. The challenge in this study relates to reindeer herding and especially the newborn calf, which must be captured and marked to know who owns it. This is very stressful for the animals and burdensome for the owners. So we applied design thinking approach to ground the ideas in Sami culture and tradition. And design thinking is powerful if the designers empathize and interacts with real users in real situations. So being there is the core of design thinking. As we all have experienced, being there was not possible due to restrictions and lockdown. Would it be possible to empathize without visiting the Sami village, without meeting people in person? So this is how we did it. None of us were familiar with Sami traditions. We even had quite a touristic view on reindeer herding. So the online interactions with the Sami village were supported by using, for example, digital maps. And here the large geographical area in which the reindeers wander around was described. By switching to a satellite view, it was described how the natural conditions supported the capture and marking. For example, an increased number of mosquitoes in the spring pushes the herd together, making it possible to build fences to gather the herd. And these blue lines were used to describe how the fences were built, nothing else. So we have 1,000 or 1,500 reindeers were pushed towards the open part of the fence into a paddock where they can rest and cool down. And when the air temperature drops, get cooler in the afternoon, they start to wander into a smaller paddock. And it's in this smaller paddock where the calves are captured, and they get a temporary number tag placed around the neck. After this, they are released, and it can be observed which reindeer mother it follows. So here is the temporary number tag, and now it can be observed which reindeer mother the calf follows. But we also realized that this was a description, but to understand a real situation, we used videos that were available on YouTube. As you can see, capturing a calf takes good skills with the rope, but also a quick eye since they are moving very fast. capturing calves in this way introduce children to Sami culture and reindeer herding. The idea that came up in the study was to replace the temporary number tag with a RFID necklace. And the connection between the calf and its mother can be automated. And keeping the record of reindeers can be digitalized. Now it's kept in a physical book. And currently we are prototyping and testing the idea's functionality. The whole process will be shorter and less time consuming, and we found two things as important. And one thing was that the user must be encouraged to storytelling. And the second was that the designers must be curious, they must listen, they must learn. That's the only way they can empathize and understand the realistic situation.
Thank you. And now we move on to the final presentation, which is by Giovanni Nella, Speculating on Nature, Technology and Finance, Geomers as a Case Study for Research Through Design. And Giovanni is a designer, critic, curator, researcher, and educator. After graduating in industrial design at Politecnico di Torino, Giovanni Nella worked for the Interaction Design Institute, IVREA, and later became a partner of the Interaction Design Lab. Giovanni graduated cum laude from the Design Academy of Eindhoven and holds a PhD in design critique from Northumbria University in the UK. During his career, he exhibited at the International Design Biennale of Saint-Étienne, the Triennale Design Museum of Milan, amongst other venues. Giovanni works are part of public collections in France and the Netherlands, and Giovanni is currently a faculty member of VCU Arts Qatar, where he teaches and publishes in academic and non-academic contexts.
My name is Giovanni Nella, and today I'm going to present you my paper, Speculating on Nature, Technology and Finance, Geomerce as a Case Study for Research Through Design, that I wrote with Jonathan Gatto. Research through design, I'm sure it's a notion that you all know, but it might be useful to refresh the definition that Zimmerman and Forlizzi provide. They say that in research through design, researchers generate new knowledge by understanding the current state and then suggesting an improved future state in the form of a design. Basically, later on, they describe what a design process is, and they propose it as an investigative way to explore a certain context or topic. Speculative design is also something that I believe you're familiar with. In this case, the definition that Danny and Rebi provided is maybe the closest one to the understanding that we have. They say that speculative design thrives on imagination and aims to open up new perspectives on what are sometimes called wicked problems, to create space for discussion and debate about alternative ways of being, and to inspire and encourage people's imagination to flow freely. So discussion and debate is in fact the space that we wanted to create with our project Geomerce. These are Jonathan Gatto on the right and myself on the left. And the scientific notion that we based our project on is the one of phytoextraction, which is very simply the absorption and collection of metals from the soil to the leaves by plants. It turns out that certain plants are particularly good at absorbing specific metals, and those plants are called hyperaccumulators. We say that we are speculating on nature, but also finance. And the financial notion that we included in our project is the one about the London Metal Exchange, which is the marketplace where all metals are given a price every 2 minutes according to offer and demand and speculating on the use of those metals. So this is how the first part of the installation looked like. Those are hyperaccumulator plants with their roots immersed in water-based metal solutions and sensors that monitor the absorbing performance of the plants. This information is sent to a computer connected to the London Metal Exchange that combines the performance of the plants in absorbing the metal with the actual value of the metal. This information is finally sent to polar plotters that draw a graph of the value of the plant. This is how the installation looked like, and what you see in the foreground is a table where the video that I'm going to show you now was projected. This video projects the scenario of this project.
For a long time, a factory has occupied this land. This factory produced parts for the motor, electronic and clothing industry. The factory didn't survive the crisis and closed, leaving behind a land contaminated by heavy metals. People appropriated this land. Not aware of the past, they started growing vegetables. But the products of these fields weren't safe and couldn't be consumed or traded. The farmer realized that the metals in the soil represent a capital, a resource to exploit. Plants can extract those metals. From the roots, metals travel all the way to the leaves. Leaves can be harvested, burned, and the metals are so collected. This process is called phytomining. So the old technique of crop rotation was still used, but according to other criteria. At times, farmers followed the trends from finance. Using hyperaccumulators, extracting over 200 kilograms of heavy metals per hectare every year. Crossing breeds to create species with higher biomass and metal intake, resulting in new hyperaccumulators for precious metals. Slowly we could move from a farm of metals to a wood of metals, or even a forest.
So this is the scenario drawn by the project, and this is again how the presentation looked like. Those hanging elements are important. They are resin cast of clarified leaves with metal powder, so that they can make an easy connection for the visitor about plants and metal. In fact, this is one of the things that we have learned, is that adopting speculative design projects as research, we have a more accessible understanding to information, and we can disseminate the information in a more accessible way. We also know that we gather more partners. These are the partners involved in this project. Finally, speculative design also works as a critique. In fact, this project served as a Trojan horse to expose some concerns about eco-capitalism. Thank you.
Okay. So with this, we end the presentation part, and we can, at least I can open the discussion part. So we have some questions in the comments, so I will start with that. First two questions are for Andreas, and maybe we can combine them together. So Álvaro asked if you could tell us a little bit more about how participation happened during the case study. In what ways did project owners, managers, advisors, and others participated and contributed in the project, and whether they also did some prototyping? And maybe if you can also address Stanko's question, if you could reflect to what extent did these stakeholders were they open and willing to utilize the double diamond, and how fast did they learn the concept?
Thank you very much for the questions, and yes, I'll address both. I'll just start with the last one here, of how they utilized it or how they accepted it. And I had a group of participants here that were not familiar with any design research and wasn't familiar with the double diamond, even though it's a quite a basic proposition, but it really stuck to the practitioners, the concept of focusing on the problem before focusing on the solution. So I think it has some really natural capabilities of facilitating a discussion, even with people that has no prior knowledge of it. So when I introduced it at first, I didn't introduce it as the double diamond. I introduced it as the concept of focusing on the problem before focusing on the solution, and people accepted that. Of course, we had some people that quite fast tried to jump to a solution, and I think, like my user group here, there was quite a lot of engineers in that, and there might be a tendency for some of them to have been developing a skill set that requires them to go quite fast to a solution, at least in the construction industry. So it took some time or some facilitation to make sure that we kept focusing on the problem until we felt, or until the stakeholders here, the key stakeholders, all felt that we had actually explored the problem. And it took, going on to the first question here, it took quite some time, and we had both specific interviews with key stakeholders. We also had some workshops. We also had some larger meetings where I presented some of the concepts, the status of the project. Just to give like a frame of reference for this, I started doing observational studies in the organization. For the first 3 months, I spent talking, understanding the organizations, being there, of course, most of the time, as much as possible. Of course, there was Corona, not now COVID, making it a bit difficult, but doing observational studies, going through all the documents I was able to get, having one-to-one interviews with different stakeholders to understand how they work. I need to understand the practice. And then we started, after 3 months, having larger meetings, workshops, where we introduced what we wanted to do, so a preliminary understanding of a part of the problem, and then trying to expand the problem field and explore that. And then we went on to when we started looking at or summarizing and doing solutions. The question is also about prototyping. I ended up doing some of the prototyping, but at workshops we then we have made it in a way of sketches, so they could actually at workshops elaborate on the initial prototypes, and then in that way being participating in also the prototype development that I could then take on to the next user group and say, we have with this user group we have found this way of framing a possible solution, and then continue work on that with other user groups, because I had quite a wide variety of users here, and the work presented in the 10 pages is 1.5 years. So yeah, so there's quite a lot.
Thank you very much for the answer. And I think that also everybody can relate with what you were experiencing with expanding this problem space and the need to move to the solutions. But then again, new problems popping out and so on. So I think that's definitely something that is part of design, and even more maybe in co-design, where you have different stakeholders involved. We also have a question for Álvaro, and if he could reflect and speculate on what the future roles of AI might be in the design process.
Yes, I think both artificial intelligence and machine learning will be maybe one more tool in the toolbox of the designer, and also like data considered as a material. And I see, I mean, not only for designers, but in general for any kind of domain, there is always like 3 ways of looking into how artificial intelligence can help or support. And it's probably like improving current applications or services that the designer is using, automating some of the things that the designer does, or maybe also like taking even further and doing something with agency. So maybe I can provide some examples of how that could be, but of course I'm just speculating. And it could be like, for example, in the case of improving or suggesting things to the designer, it can be like if you as a designer are doing some interviews and you know which role or which stakeholders you are going to interview, maybe you can use an artificial intelligence to ask like, can you give me 20 or 30 suggestions of questions that I can ask? And then it's just, of course, it's back to the designer to decide like, oh, I will use these questions or I will improve these questions. But then it's like you are working with a base instead of just working from a blank page. It can also be like, for example, if you are also doing an interview, that you automate the process of transcribing, because maybe that's a little bit boring for a designer, even though you learn a lot when you are typing word by word. But maybe you just think it's like, oh, if there would be a tool, then I would just automate that process. And then the agency, I think it could be more complicated to show, because I think for the moment there are not that many tools that are present in agency. But it could be like, for example, like the AI is also like suggesting like insights based on an interview that you have done. So I think like these both like improving like current services, automating things, and doing something with agency could be like 3 cases where artificial intelligence can help the designer. And of course, I'm speculating here.
Okay, thank you. I will add one more question. So from Andreas to you, and he asked something regarding your cards that you tested. So you tested the cards both with users with and without prior AI knowledge. And did you observe if and how technology-specific knowledge influence the idea generation of different groups? And if I may add also one additional question to this, did you observe that maybe some cards are better than the others in maybe stimulating the ideas?
For the first one, I would say like, especially there were like one group that was artificial intelligence students. And of course, they were more familiar, but they were also from the first year. So I would say it's like they were still kind of like learning like the basics of artificial intelligence. And I noticed a difference, but actually it was not more from the technological perspective. It was more because they were lacking a context to where they could apply artificial intelligence. So for example, the librarians or other groups, they knew very well what type of problems they normally face. And then they were kind of like starting from the problem that they were having, thinking of ways in which like artificial intelligence could help them. But in the case of the artificial intelligence students, it was kind of like they were relying more on hobbies, or the ideas were a little bit more random in that sense. And that was kind of like a challenge for them in that sense. But from a technological perspective, I could say like even like the artificial intelligence students, they were not focusing that much on the technology. They were not discussing like how they would program something or anything like that. They were more focusing on the idea generation. And if you can repeat the second question.
Yeah, the second question was about the cards. If some cards prompted more ideas than the others.
Yes, and I think and this is also some reflection that it's going to be into future work, and is that I believe that this is a hypothesis, of course, but I believe like based on like a previous experience that people has already had with artificial intelligence. For example, it's maybe quite common for people to think about autonomous cars, and that you have like a vision recognition. So then when you see like a card that is based on vision, then probably it's already triggering some ideas on how you can apply vision into your ideas. But there are other types of artificial intelligence or applicability of AI that is a little bit more abstract, or that there are not so many examples that are already in the market. And I found that those especially were maybe not so much used. So participants still were discussing them, but they were having a harder time to kind of relate into how they could apply them. So as future work, what we are considering is like how to create maybe a portfolio of prototypes or demos that the participants can test, so they can get some experience with different types of applications of artificial intelligence, so they can then later ideate from that experience.
Yeah,
and
also,
thanks a lot for the questions.
Yeah, and also in these future steps, you could probably then like adjust maybe the cards to pick the ones that work better, or reformulate the ones that don't. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna move. Also, we have a question from Giovanni for OSA, saying that it's a very fascinating research and context for researching, and he was wondering if you had a chance to share your study with the SAMI community, and what was their feedback.
Yeah, since it was a co-creation project, so there are representatives from the Sami village working with us. So we sort of shared the ideas all the way. And the feedback was like, I mean, it was an acceptable solution for them. But if we go back when we started, so we had engineers with us, and as Andreas said, they like to jump into solutions. So we had to say that, wait, you have to understand the problem first. So if we just look into the first ideas, and if we would have presented those for the Sami village, they would have been desperate. It would have been a total failure, because it didn't follow their culture at all. So one idea from the beginning was that they cut the ears of the reindeers, of the calves, to mark them, but that's so into their culture. But the first thing that we would like to take away was actually stop cutting the reindeers, but that would have been a total failure. So yeah, they were part of it and are still part of the case study in the prototyping.
Mm-hmm. And you were as part of your design thinking process to let's say handle this design problem, you used personas at one point as some, let's say, replacement for the stakeholders. And to what degree do you think that this was like a good concept to mimic the stakeholder support when designing a solution? Is this something that works in the initial idea generation phase, or is it something that can also be used later for the evaluation, or should at some point the stakeholders really be involved, let's say, prototyping, testing? How much did the personas actually help?
I think it's important. This time we knew that the personas has to be built on real situations. It has to be grounded in people, in actual people, because we have seen too many times when you use a persona and the engineers and designers sort of invent a person. So they are not doing this empathize or interviews or being there things. So then they just get stupid pictures of people instead. So I think that that was the important lesson for personas, that they has to build on real people. And I think also, again, if you have a persona and you start to design a solution, most of the designers throw away the persona. So then it's also important to just step back, look into the persona and do it once again. So I think the persona should be there, and it's good if they are part of also now even the prototyping.
Thank you.
I'm a believer.
Yeah, and I guess that as for everybody, the pandemic created the problems here to get maybe the real contact and even the better picture of everything. But we'll get also back to that. We have a question for Giovanni from Álvaro. He said, he asks, what feedback did you get from the biologists, technologists, and financial agents? And what are your future plans for Geomers?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Definitely the people that we interacted the most with were the biologists, and they were also, I would say, maybe the most generous ones. The feedback that they gave us, well, for them, we were really working on a simple principle that any biologist knows, is familiar with. So at first, maybe they weren't particularly excited, although they were very happy to educate us on that science. Later on, they became more engaged because the project was taken in different contexts where there are different metals in the soil and with a different climate. So for them, it was a challenge to find the right hyperaccumulator, the right species, the right plant for us. And it became more of indeed a co-design or co-creative process. They were happy that a scientific notion was disseminated. Another partner that was important for us was the company that developed the sensors that would detect how much metal the plants were absorbing at each time. For them, it was important to be involved in a project that had a connection with nature, but also had a great visibility, because since the beginning, it was meant to be exhibited at the Design Week in Milan. And they, in fact, they developed sensors that they didn't have in the catalog before, because we were dealing with metals that they normally do not monitor. So it was also for them a challenge to develop products or technologies that they didn't have, although it wasn't difficult for them to produce them. Maybe what was interesting in this project was that everyone throughout the process found their piece of the cake. Even the video that you saw that was projected, it was made by a professional that obviously in the beginning was involved mostly for money, like he had a fee, and later he realized that that was a typology of work that he wouldn't have done otherwise, and he was happy to learn. The feedback was positive from the partners. Maybe the feedback that was more interesting is the one from the audience. There were people that were able to understand the level of speculation that is in the project. People that instead they would reject the fact that the project is not immediately feasible, therefore they wouldn't see a value in the project. Some people will see it as a solution to problems, especially in the lands where they're from. Some other people instead will see it for what it was meant to be, which was a space for debate and a critique also to eco-capitalism, this idea that money is somehow the solution to every problem, including the ones that have to do with ecology.
If I can add here, you also partially answered Stanko's question, who wanted to know a little bit more about how the development of the installation went and who participated. But if I can also add something that you mentioned, also the value. So whatever somebody sees in the installation and gets from it, I think that what Andreas previously said, that actually co-designing and co-creation, or bringing different stakeholders together, some of them will have better value perception in the end, and there will be the feeling of ownership and maybe some greater effort and better results in the end. I don't know if you can also reflect, was it the same in your case when you mentioned the biologists and how they solved some problems?
Yeah, totally. I think it's true that we have different stakeholders, but it's also true that the context abroad for everyone was research. And I think it's important that when you involve people, you don't make them feel like service providers. So you're not just there to get something from them, but you involve them in the process. And that is not something that you can always plan, and it's not something that you can always design in the process. But as the project, I think as the project gets certain qualities, which someone highlighted, was it, yeah, Álvaro, you said very nice and artistic prototypes. For example, that part was not trivial. I think that when the first prototypes came out and everyone realized that they were actually nice and they had somewhat an artistic value to it, it provided more motivation, and everyone was more willing to be part and be associated to the project. So I think that's, in our case, that was the co-creation process, was making them feel part of something valuable for them, but also valuable in general. It was meant to be an exhibition during the Design Week in Milan, which is an important event, and it was well done. It was made nicely, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. But yeah, given all of this, then also one more important aspect is this learning. So not also like working together, but also learning through co-design and seeing what is important in different domains. Which brings me back to Álvaro, who said that also one of the limitations, and we were also discussing this in one of the previous questions, so the depth of knowledge that people have of AI and how good they can use the cards, for example, to brainstorm. But I would also say that some beauty of brainstorming when not knowing much about the technology can also be like that there's no limits. There's much less limits and more creativity if people don't know all the limitations, or if they don't know what the current state of research and technology is. Did you see that also in your study, or?
Are you asking Giovanni?
I'm asking you. Sorry, I'm asking you.
Okay. Yes, I mean, we were seeing like a broad range of different type of ideas, and I would say like the ones with the artificial intelligence were from the artificial intelligence students maybe were the ones that were more limited because they were kind of going into the cliches of like a meal planner or like they were not going more in depth into how the solution would work or which kind of problem would solve. And for me, that was kind of like the main lesson from that experience. And compared to other roles that were maybe more familiar with working in, it could be a library or in an accessibility media agency, then they were already kind of facing everyday problems and they already knew kind of like, okay, this is like something that could be nice to solve for me. And they maybe didn't know that much about artificial intelligence, but then they could use the different applicability of AI to kind of filter the problems and kind of like think of in different ways of presenting ideas.
Okay, thank you. So this, let's say, generic AI cards had to be somehow used to and then develop actually some concrete solutions, which then, of course, the creativity can kick in. And also for Andreas, I think this was also really important. So you said that you if you would take like those generic guidelines for risk management, then it just all comes up to checking the boxes, and people don't really get that much involved and think about all these details. So Andreas, could you maybe provide us some examples of how this co-designing and collaboration for the risk management actually developed, or you were able to identify some of the risks or approach to managing risks that you would otherwise do differently? So what would be some of the nice examples?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, I think one of the main takeaways here is that for some time, in general, in project risk management, there's been a tendency to just adopt best practices like do these 5 steps and then you're home safe. But there's not much. There's not much evidence to support that it actually creates any value in the projects, and most of the time all the users will have known this because they're practitioners, so they might have been working in the construction industry for 20 years, having read kind of the same guidelines over the years stating you have to do the same stuff. They try to do it, it doesn't work, and then they still are doing it because that's what best practice says, so they were supposed to be doing that. Then when we come up with give them a room to reflect upon what would make sense for them to do instead. So just skip all the best practice. All you're supposed to do this. We just park that outside this this room, and then now you reflect upon your practices. So what are you doing right now? What would you believe that in the next project would help you? And then when you start that discussion and actually explore what are the problems, and then start defining solutions based on the actual problems they see in everyday life, then you end up with other solutions. And one of these other solutions in our case was that, of course, a project manager should do the assessment of a project. That would be basic best practice literature methodology, and everyone thought that was supposed to be the case. But when we talked about it and engaged the stakeholders, we found out that the project manager was not the right one to do a complexity assessment of the project, because they lacked some specific knowledge that was actually necessary to generate value. So we actually then removed some of this responsibility that are inherently in best practice a project manager's responsibility. Then we move that to other people to get another perspective on understanding the project at the very initial stages in the fuzzy front end, where there are a lot of decisions being made. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. And we also have one question that I see in the chat for Osa. So to what extent were engineers, designers previously familiar with the problem they had to tackle? And I would also add here, how much did they know, they think they know before the projects, but then learned maybe through the interaction with through the co-design interaction?
Yeah, that's really interesting question. They were not at all familiar with the culture or with Sami people or with reindeer herding at all. So they were from the southern parts of Sweden. So they came into the case study with quite a touristic view. They thought that the Sami people had reindeers just as pets, just for fun. And then they realized that it's hard work to actually to have them and to, it's an industry, and actually it's a livelihood and family business. So that was the main lesson learned for them. I think, and also they learned about the co-creation process and realized that it's really tricky with minority people and their culture, because it's so inherited across several generations, for example. But then they learned actually just to be curious and to understand that if they allow the clients to be engaged in a process, they also buy in to the solution. And since they invest time and energy in trying to solve a problem together with the researchers and designers, they are sort of, it's easier to implement the solution.
Thank you. And if you would do this project, so if you had all this knowledge of how it goes, if you would do it again, would you change something? Would you use the same tools that you use? For example, you use the online maps and YouTube for getting to know the culture and to develop the design purpose. Would you now do this project differently, or would you do some things differently to get a better grasp of the problem?
Yeah, I think we will definitely be there. I think it's a huge difference to actually be at the place in the nature where because the nature matters so much for where they gather the reindeers. And I think we didn't really understand those parts, but we could understand it's a huge geographical area and it's many reindeers. But being there is totally the best.
Okay, thank you. And a similar question for Giovanni. So did your project, your final design, did it meet your expectations? So was it able to, let's say, provoke the emotions that you wanted it to provoke among, let's say, your users who are the visitors, the ones that see the installation? Or do you think that something would have to be changed in the design process, maybe to capture even more emotion?
No, it worked well. It worked fine, and I think the installation had a good presence to catch attention and engage with the visitors. Mm-hmm. I don't know if there would be anything that I would change. Definitely the biology part can be enriched, so but it's actually, ironically, it's also the most expensive part, not because plants are expensive, but because plants are, you have to get them, you have to manage them. So having the living plants is the hardest part. But we could have more, definitely. It's important. I think we were pretty good at avoiding having flat information in the show, so having a lot of text or illustrations. It was important for us that the installation had a physical presence. That worked fine.
Sorry to interrupt you. Would you say that you, if you would like describe your design process? So we heard a few times today that it's actually first, it's very important to develop the problem, and then so to expand the problem space as much as possible before going to the solution. Did you also experience something like that? Were you able to explore the problem space, or were these like technological problems or some other kind of problems popping out later? Were there, let's say, something that you had planned for, or you had to get back to the drawing board and see how to solve that?
The only hiccups in the process, I think, were when the eco enthusiasm, I would say, would take over, and then someone will really push for the project to become a solution, which it wasn't. And I mean, phyto remediation exists as a solution, as a partial solution, but the project didn't have those intentions. So I think when you work with non-designers, what happens is that someone among the stakeholders expects a solution, and that's not necessarily what you are providing. And that's when you have to walk backwards together with the stakeholder and get them again on the right track, on the feasible track. Yeah.
Okay, I think this is a great way to end this session. I would like to thank you all for your presentations, for your discussion. I would like to thank you for the questions and comments. And I would just like to call you all to our social event, which will take place in Gather. You can find the links everywhere in all the chats and also in the schedule. And yeah, enjoy the remaining 2 days of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.